Hello and welcome to the Hebrew grammar part of our rhythm. So on Monday, 9.1, week 9, we looked at the Hebrew letters and vowels of Genesis 1, 1, 2, 3. On Wednesday, I did a podcast on creation, which you can find at my Patreon site, which is at the bottom of the description of this in YouTube. Today, we want to look at the grammar and meaning of Genesis 1, 1 to 3. I found it very difficult to not comment on this on Monday. Genesis 1, of course, a favorite verse for everybody, I think. A lot of people know this verse. It's one of the high memorized verses, I suspect. In Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay, what does it mean? Well, the bait on the front is the word in, and it's a separable prefix. It's not intrinsic to the meaning of, say, reshit. It is almost a separate word, although Hebrew doesn't print it as a second word. So bait means in. Now, there's no word for the here. The word for the is hey patak doubling. We see it right here on Hashemayim. Hey patak doubling is the way to say the normal way to do it. There's no the here. In fact, reshit, you see rosh. Rosh means head or beginning, because the head is the source or the beginning from one perspective. This would seem to be an infinitive construct form. And so one way to take it would be in beginning of, although that's a fairly, it's not a straightforward kind of construct, because normally a construct would be on a noun, and you would have a noun following it. But it is certainly possible to translate this as in beginning of God creating, although again, it's debated as to what exactly that the connotation is there, but it's not a straightforward in the beginning. I will say at least that. Bara is a perfect tense. It is the three letters are all there, Beit Resh Aleph of bara, and so there's no performative or sufformative. There's no prefix. There's no suffix. It's just the fax ma'am, and so this would be third masculine singular, and of course the subject is God. So God created in the beginning of God created, or in the beginning God in beginning of God created, or in the beginning God created. However you want to translate that. Bara is of course not the only word for making something. The other word is asa, and asa is used throughout most of this chapter. Bara is used 3 times of the creation of everything at the beginning, of the creation of, I believe, animals, and then the creation of humanity. And so some would say that bara is a special kind of creation. I think, we could argue, I think, given the distinct places where bara is located, that bara could imply a special kind of creation. If you listen to the podcast on Wednesday on creation, I'm not sure that we can argue that this is ex nihilo creation, although some do. I'm not sure whether we have enough grammatical evidence to say anything like that definitively. However, I feel the pain. I feel the argument that bara may have some stronger nuance than just make or do. You'll notice that the word for God, Elohim, is plural. It has the Hirik Yod Mem ending on it, which is very interesting, is it not? That even though the word for God is plural, it is treated as a singular. This is quite interesting. And of course, as Christians, we might be tempted to see the Trinity here, although I doubt very seriously that Moses or the author of Genesis would have understood the Trinity. That's just anachronistic in terms of what at all they are likely to have understood. You remember that Christians didn't decide on the Trinity really until the 300s. I mean, there was Trinitarian thinking, but the details were being worked out well into the post-biblical age. The New Testament has all the ingredients, you might say. You might say that the New Testament has all the ingredients for the Trinity, but it's not formulated in a kind of nice, crisp fashion. So it would seem anachronistic to suggest that, at least on the author's part. Now, of course, God knows. He. You know, God. Hey, Christ, watch this. God the Father. So God may have intended more than the biblical author would have understood. In terms of historical development, it is perhaps we can see emerging, maybe, I'm just throwing this out here, out of a polytheistic concept. So Abraham's parents were polytheists. I forget what passage it is. Is it in Deuteronomy that says or maybe Joshua 24? Our parents worshipped many gods beyond the river Euphrates, or something like that. Maybe Joshua 24. And so, out of a polytheistic context, Abraham worships God Most High. It's at least possible that in the history of the background, the plurality of Elohim became a singularity for the Jewish people. Well, some of that is kind of shrouded in the mist of history that we don't have access to. But it is striking for us as Christians to see that the word for God is plural, and yet the verb is singular. Quite striking, I would say. Well, okay, I'm going way beyond the grammar. But this is, in beginning, God created. What did God create? He created 8 hashamayim va'et haaretz. Now, these 8s are what are called definite object markers. You don't translate them, and they're implied in the word the. What's a direct object? Direct object is what receives the action of the verb. God created what? He created heavens. God created what? He created earth. And so the answer to that question, what, is the direct object in a sentence. And so the 8 basically says direct object approaching. And the direct object, there are 2 of them here, compound direct object, heavens and earth. Now, when I say heavens and earth, I'm probably importing my worldview into the text. That probably a better, what was in the bubble above Moses' head translation would be the skies and the land. Because I doubt very seriously that the Israelites thought that the earth was a sphere. I know there's that verse in Isaiah, he looks on the circle of the earth, but a circle is 2-dimensional. A sphere is 3-dimensional. So we may be thinking more of a disk. And in other words, what was in the bubble above Isaiah's head? Probably more of a disk than a sphere. Again, I hope not to die for any of these ideas. These are just my attempts to read the Bible in context, in its ancient Near Eastern context, because that's to whom these words were first written. And so the most likely way to understand these words is the way people were using these words in the ancient Near East. The way I'm using these words is not at all the most likely way in terms of the original meaning of these words. Well, Hashemayim, I've already told you that Hey, Patak doubling is the way to make the. Mayim is a dual, perhaps, now again, people don't think of this forever, but perhaps in some very, 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 very ancient Hebrew thinking, the heavens were basically 2 heavens, this side and that side, maybe. But of course, we use words, when I grow up, using the English language, those sorts of nuances aren't necessarily carried over. It just becomes a practice. We're here in King Josiah's kingdom to ask somebody why the word for sky is a dual. And they're probably not going to be able to tell it. They'll probably say, what? What? Oh, I guess it is dual. Never noticed that before. It's just the way we say it. And so we are wont to make, oh, watch me do voodoo with the text, you know, and we do all kinds of crazy things that no one in the Bible would have ever thought of. I'm standing under the concept, you know. It's the Paraclete who called alongside. I doubt anybody ever thought of that. Those are games we play with words. They're fun games, don't get me wrong. They make nice sermon illustrations. But I'm basically saying that I'm not sure how many ancient Israelites paid attention to the fact that the word for sky is a dual. But it probably does embody some historical reminiscence of a worldview at some point. Okay, so Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens of the earth, heavens and the skies and the land, or in the beginning of God created the heavens and the earth. One of those two, probably. Okay, that's verse 1. Verse 2. This is not verse 3. And I didn't give you the word I'm breaking apart. Or I did. It's at the bottom. Okay. Vakoshek alpaneto. No. Okay. This is a little bit messed up. It's not messed up, actually. The problem is that I've broken it apart without giving you the original. Let's see if you can handle it. So, Vahashamayim, I've lost a Vav. Man, there should be a Vav there. Why don't I be a perfectionist for just a second? It won't happen again, and as far as me being a perfectionist, but let's do I Dream of Jeannie, and okay, let's try that again. Vaha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu. Okay, now there's what it looks like normally, and now there's the broken out part as I had it. So va is and then hey, it's normally hey patak doubling, but Aleph say, I don't do doubling, I'm a guttural. And so we tried to shoot the Dagesh gun into the Aleph, and it ricocheted and made a patak into a long kamatz. So it went from a short A to a long A. We call that compensatory lengthening. And so yes, this is the word for the, even though it doesn't have hey patak doubling. Hey kamatz is another form of the word the when you have a guttural that doesn't do doubling. So, and the earth. Now, when you have the word and on a noun, at least this is the way I learned it, it can often have a contrastive force. So you might argue that it should be translated, but the land. So you might say, in the beginning, or when God began to create the skies and the land, and the earth was formless and void. Or in the begin, or you could go, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but the earth was formless and void. Of course, there's the gap theory, which I don't think the text supports. It's we do this, right? We come up with a theological scheme that we read into the text. I don't think there's any real evidence for the gap theory here, but there might be. I mean, I'm not saying it. And there is the word but here, or maybe it's but. So basically, God created the heavens and the earth, but we find the earth formless and void. It's not totally formed. Of course, so the old theory that arose, I think it arose after evolution came out. The old theory was that God created the heavens and the earth in an orderly fashion, and some verse from Isaiah 41. I did this verse a few months ago. Basically, God created the universe. God did not create the universe a tohu vavohu. He created the universe, the world, to be inhabited. And so I had a teacher in college, Herb Donjel, who suggested that perhaps, and of course I think my grandfather Harry Shepherd may have been sympathetic to this idea too, that God created the heavens and the earth in Genesis 1:1, but then Satan and his angels fell, creating a chaotic world, a tohu vavohu, a formless and void, a shapeless and empty. And so then God says, let there be light. So God reorders things after things have gone messy because of Satan and his angels' falls. And of course, then when evolution came out, they wanted to slip dinosaurs, into the pre-tohu vavohu world. I don't really see any evidence for that that thinking. In fact, Genesis never mentions Satan. We as Christians, of course, believe that Satan is in Genesis 3, but the Old Testament never says that. This is where we bring our theological concepts and impose them on the text without even knowing it. Now, I believe theologically that the serpent was Satan, but I don't think there's any Old Testament author that ever thought that, as far as we can tell. As far as we can tell, the first Jewish writing to think of the serpent as Satan is the Life of Adam and Eve, which is 1st century BC. BC. Every book of the Old Testament was written before we have any Jewish book that connects the serpent with Satan. This is this idea of a progressive unfolding of precision and clarity that took place throughout the centuries. Again, you don't have to agree with that. There are other ways to skin a cat. I've never skinned a cat and hope to never do so. But anyway, and the land, Hayatah. Now, Hayatah is Haya, which is not Haya. It's Haya as in to be. It's the to be verb. And Kamatz He is the feminine, third person feminine singular, the third feminine singular ending. So it was. Why is it feminine? Because Eretz is feminine. So the word for land is feminine, which makes sense if you know ancient ways of thinking. All the goddesses of the earth are feminine in ancient kinds of mythologies. I'm not suggesting there's mythology here. I'm just saying that there's a historical reason for the word for the land to be feminine. Grammatical. It's not theological. It's just a grammatical thing. So, and the land was tohu vavohu. It was formless and void. It was shapeless and empty. Okay. Now, of course, in the other interpretation, and we talked about this, the increasing clarity with this. The other interpretation is to say that when God came to create the universe, when God was beginning to create the earth and the skies, it was a mess. When God got here, man, this place was a mess. It was tohu vavohu. The land was tohu vavohu. And God said, man, clean up on aisle 6. Let's get this thing together. And so when he gets there, everything's tohu vavohu, v'koshek al panei tehom. Which, if I can get, I didn't break that one out because I didn't break it out. So this is and koshek and darkness, not kojak, but v'koshek and darkness al panei, upon the face of. Sarah Yod is a construct plural, masculine construct plural. So face of, we add the of because it's construct. Face of tehom, of the deep. Now tehom is an interesting word. Now I believe that for Moses, for the author of Genesis, tehom is just deep waters, and there's no divine connotation here at all. But it is interesting to know the history of this word, tehom, within the Semitic languages. Remember, Hebrew is not the only Semitic language. Before Hebrew ever saw the dawn, there was Ugaritic. Ugaritic came and went before Hebrew existed. There is, of course, Babylonian and ancient Assyrian. There's Northwest Semitic. So there are these other, before Hebrew languages develop, right? English hasn't always existed. If you read Beowulf, what is it from, like 1200? I can't remember. But, English would be incomprehensible. I couldn't understand someone talking to me in Beowulfian English. And so Hebrew emerged from a Semitic language pool. And so if you go back into that pool, if you go into Babylonian, there's the saltwater goddess Tiamat. It's related historically. The word Tiamat in Babylonian, who's a goddess, in Hebrew becomes Tehom. The consonants are the thing to look for. The vowels change a lot. You look for the consonants. So Tiamat, T, there's the Tav, Ha, there's the Hey, Mat, there's the Mem, and then the Tav is a kind of like a feminine ending, maybe. And I don't know Babylonian. I'm so stupid. But anyway, so there's a history here. But Don't get me wrong. Nobody thought that. I don't think any Israelite thought, Tehom, the goddess of sea. No, I don't think they thought that. They just thought the deep. Words change meaning over time, right? And this is an important thing. It's called the etymological fallacy. The history of a word simply does not tell you what a word means now. Now, it may be related, and you could trace the history, but I use words the way I use words. I don't think about it. You don't think about it. We just use words. And so the games we play, oh, this comes from this and this. Oh, the history of this is this. That's all etymological fallacy stuff. That's all reading stuff into the text. Maybe not all, but a lot of it is. You just have to, the context is what determines what a word means at any particular point in time. And the history may illustrate the current meaning, but the history of, I'll put it this way, the history of a word does not determine. It may be visible, but it does not determine the meaning of a word now. That's called the etymological fallacy, or also the lexical fallacy, which is the idea that there's some root meaning that plays itself out every time a word is used. Those particular understandings, which are prevalent from the pulpit, are not. They reflect a misunderstanding of how language works. Well, okay. Let's finish up this verse. Veruach Elohim merakefet al panei hamayim. Okay, ruach is the spirit or breath. And here's the question: should we translate this as spirit at this point? Because again, our tendency is to read later theological concepts that we have in our dictionaries, to take our dictionaries and bring our dictionaries to the text, when the dictionary appropriate for understanding the original meaning of the text is the dictionary in Moses's head, or the dictionary in whoever the author of Genesis 1 in their head. Now, of course, God can have all kinds of things in his head that I don't have in my head and that the original author didn't have in their head. But remember, we don't have access, to what was in God's head unless he tells us. And of course, so it's circular reasoning. Well, God was thinking spirit. Well, I do believe that. I believe that because of the New Testament, and I believe that because of church history. But Moses, it would not have. I do not think spirit. Well, it could have been, but I don't think spirit was in Moses's head. I think probably breath is what is in Moses's head, and the breath of God was hovering. It might be spirit. I mean, don't get me wrong, but that's an argument you have to make. These are the kinds of questions you ask when you're doing exegesis, trying to draw meaning out of the text rather than eisegesis, where you shove meaning into the text. So the Spirit of God, merakefet, hovering. The Spirit of God was hovering. There's no word for was there. You have to stick it in to make good English. This is a participle. A mem with a shava under it is a pal participle, a d participle. So normally we would expect a doubling of the second consonant. Here are the three consonants of this word, the root consonants. But chates don't do doubling. I'm sorry, it's not in my contract. And so the only thing that's left to tell me that this is a pal or d participle is the fact that there's a shava under the mem. It's typical for these other stems to make their participles with a mem. So the hiphil also uses a mem to make its participle, but it doesn't have a shava under it. Okay, so and the Spirit of God, or the breath of God, was blowing. Some translate say the breath of God was blowing, but you might translate it the Spirit of God was hovering. Al panei, upon the face of. There's this. We had that before, right? Upon the face of. This is a masculine plural construct. On the face of. Hey, patak doubling. Hey, patak doubling. This is the, and mayim is water. Upon the waters. You notice that shemayim and mayim are similar. I'm tempted to say, again, I'm not saying an Israelite would have thought of this. I doubt an Israelite would have thought of this unless they were just having an artful moment. But I wonder, this may be a stupid thought. I wonder if somewhere way back in the history of the Hebrew language, if waters and sky are related, mayim and shemayim. Okay, somebody knows that answer. I don't. Okay, finally, verse 3. Vayomer Elohim Yahior. Vayehi. And God said, let there be light. And there was light, as is always the case when God says something. His word does not return to him empty, but it always accomplishes that which it sets out to do. Isaiah 55:11, I think. Okay, so let's break it all down. So this is Vav Patak doubling. That's a converted imperfect. A converted imperfect is a past tense. So this is, and God said. The yod is a preformative. The yod says, one, that this is an imperfect tense. It is, we know it's a converted imperfect, but it's an imperfect also. The yod says, I'm an imperfect, and the yod says third masculine singular. And the third masculine singular is Elohim, which again, insert all the comments on the masculine plural ending. And then Amar is the word for say. And God said, Yehi or. Yehi is related to Haya. Remember Haya? We had in the second verse, Hayata, which was third feminine singular. This is third masculine singular, but it's a special form. It's called a jussive. So Hebrew made jussives off of imperfects. Now, historically, there may have been a different short vowel that dropped off before Hebrew reached its full state. So the yod is a performative. The yod is the third masculine singular performative of the imperfect. But it's not, the hey is gone, which I think is a clue that we have a jussive here, I think. Although the hey might be gone with the normal imperfect too, but I don't think so. I think the hey is there with the normal. No, it's not, because it's not there here. So haya is a third hey verb, and the third hey often is chopped off. So anyway, this is a jussive. It means let it be, Yahi, and or is the subject, light. Let light be. So this is a jussive, and then here's another converted imperfect. Hey, Vav Patak doubling, except why is it a kamatz? Well, there should be a yod here. I mean, there should be a dagesh here in the Vayehi. Why isn't there a dagesh here? Well, the answer is this shavah. There's some obscure rule, and I learned this in Lasor's Old Testament Hebrew. There's some obscure rule that when there is a shavah under the a double performative, sometimes the doubling goes away. I don't know why that's the case, but that's why there should be a dagesh here. And this is a converted imperfect, and it was, and light was. And God said, let there be light, and light came to be. Okay, well, I hope that wasn't too confusing. I've talked about a lot of stuff, but this is very interesting. I love these verses. They are full of all kinds of nifty puzzles that we don't have enough evidence really to say definitively, I don't think, what the answers to all these puzzles are, but that doesn't stop me from having my opinions and you having your opinions. So this has been Genesis 1:1-3, week 9 of our journey through Old Testament theology. Next week, I want to look at Genesis 3, when God doles out the punishments to Adam and Eve and the serpent after they have sinned in the garden. Or maybe they're not punishments. Maybe they're descriptions of consequences. We can talk about that next week as well. So see you next week. Have a great weekend if you're watching this on a Friday.